Acara sampingan dalam rangka Dewan Hak Asasi Manusia Perserikatan Bangsa-Bangsa, Dewan HAM PBB, ke-57 2024 di Jenewa, Swiss, kembali menyoroti situasi pelanggaran hak asasi manusia di Papua Barat. Acara yang bertajuk Hak Asasi Manusia di Papua Barat ini, diselenggarakan oleh Dewan Gereja Dunia dan sejumlah organisasi mitra. Dalam diskusi tersebut, berbagai isu serius mengenai hak asasi manusia di Papua Barat diangkat, termasuk kasus pembunuhan di luar hukum, extrajudicial killings, pengungsian internal akibat konflik bersenjata, pembatasan terhadap kebebasan sipil, serta meningkatnya kasus perampasan tanah milik masyarakat adat Papua. Para pembicara menyoroti bahwa pelanggaran yang terjadi di Papua Barat telah berlangsung selama beberapa dekade tanpa ada penyelesaian yang memadai. Konflik bersenjata antara kelompok pro-kemerdekaan Papua dan aparat keamanan Indonesia disebut telah memicu gelombang pengungsian masyarakat sipil di sejumlah wilayah. Selain itu, pembatasan kebebasan berekspresi dan berkumpul juga menjadi perhatian utama. Masyarakat Papua seringkali menghadapi intimidasi dan kekerasan saat menyuarakan aspirasi mereka, termasuk dalam konteks politik maupun budaya. Salah satu isu yang menonjol adalah meningkatnya perampasan tanah adat untuk berbagai proyek pembangunan. Para aktivis menegaskan bahwa tanah merupakan bagian tak terpisahkan dari identitas dan kehidupan masyarakat adat Papua. Namun, maraknya eksploitasi sumber daya alam tanpa konsultasi yang memadai telah merusak lingkungan serta meminggirkan hak-hak masyarakat adat. Peserta acara menyerukan perhatian internasional yang lebih besar terhadap situasi ini. Mereka mendesak Dewan HAM PBB untuk mendorong pemerintah Indonesia agar segera mengambil langkah konkret dalam menghentikan pelanggaran hak asasi manusia di Papua Barat dan memastikan keadilan bagi para korban. Acara ini juga menjadi momentum bagi komunitas internasional untuk mendiskusikan langkah-langkah mendukung perlindungan hak-hak masyarakat adat di Papua serta mendorong dialog damai yang inklusif antara semua pihak terkait. Acara ini mencerminkan komitmen organisasi masyarakat sipil internasional untuk terus memantau dan mendukung upaya penegakan hak asasi manusia di Papua Barat, meskipun tantangan yang dihadapi sangat kompleks dan berakar dalam sejarah panjang konflik di wilayah tersebut.
I'd like to welcome you to this event on behalf of the co-organizers, the World Council of Churches, Franciscans International, Human Rights Monitor, Asian Forum for Human Rights and Development, Amnesty International, TAPOL, and the Centre for Climate Crime and Climate Justice at Queen Mary University of London. Thank you very much for joining us. Our event is focusing on the human rights situation in West Papua, which I think probably qualifies as the worst and longest-standing human rights and humanitarian crisis that most people have never heard of. And we haven't heard of it for a very specific reason. It's not an accident. It's a deliberate consequence of the lack of access that the international community has to the territory. And this is therefore a precious opportunity to present information about the current situation and its dimensions in West Papua to the international community in this side event related to the current ongoing Human Rights Council session. So given the brevity of our time, I think the most important thing is to hear directly from one of the human rights defenders from the territory, from West Papua, who will be our first speaker today. Before I give him the floor, just one word of housekeeping. We are under the requirement to only have photographs taken by specifically designated representatives of the co-organizers. So please refrain from taking any photographs. If you'd be so kind, there will be photographs taken, but only by a recognized representative of the co-organizing organizations. So now I would like to introduce Leo Ije, who is a human rights defender from West Papua and can speak directly with regard to the situation that brings us together today. So Leo, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes for your intervention. Thank you very much.
My name is Leonardo Ije. I'm human rights lawyer for West Papua. When I heard about the plan for the Permanent People Tribunal, I feel strongly that it's important for me to involve it. I put myself for what is warn the persecutor. As a lawyer, I have been working on cases in the land of Papua, such as a land grabbing on deforestation, which had both triggered the opposition of the local community. People who fight to protect the forests and our central land are met with opposition action from the military. Civil society is criminalized, arrested, jailed, and hit with reason target from the security apparatus. It's not unusual for civilians to be forced to leave the village because do not want to endorse state violence. They become refugees in their own villages, which are left behind, are then open they to be ransacked. This cycle has been underway since the Indonesian annexation in Papua until today. I caused my path to become a lawyer after witnessing the land and forest my mother being taken away by government. In order to become a transmigration project. It was the 1990s and I was 10 years old. Our family refused to give up the land. So they ran away to avoiding the paper to hand over the land. Then they got my uncle. With the barrel of a gun being put to his head, they took him away, tortured him, and he was forced sign the statement surrendering us a central land. The land was taken over by the government. At the point, my head, as the child, wobbled and hurt the land, witnessing the loss of my mother. Right to her, a central land and forest. We see our customary land and forest as a mother. I have been involved in advocacy to make the world pay attention to what is happening in Papua right now. Land grabbing by Indonesian government is pervasive across the land of Papua. Our central land and forests are like a mother for me. A Papuan, they are inseparably from my fair being. We all know a mother is really important to a child. Surely, my feeling chimes with the worries of the world today with control global warming. Papua is the biggest piece of land in the world after the Amazon and the Congo. Saving Papua land and its forests is our way of saving in the world from the dread of global warming. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leo. In the opening of his statement, Leo referred to the Permanent People's Tribunal, which held public hearings at Queen Mary University in London on the 27th to the 29th of July this year. And we'll be hearing from one of the subsequent speakers about that process and the conclusions reached from it. But now I want to introduce our next speaker, who is Mr. Norman Voss, who serves as coordinator of Human Rights Monitor, an independent international non-profit project promoting human rights through documentation and advocacy. Human Rights Monitor has done extensive research and reporting on West Papua, publishing a quarterly update on the human rights situation in the region and a monthly update on the number of internally displaced persons. And I take this opportunity to warmly commend to you the materials and the reports provided by Human Rights Monitor and really encourage you to check them out and to subscribe to their materials. Norman, the floor is yours for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, everyone. Human Rights Monitor is, as you introduced, a project based in Europe, but we're working with partners in West Papua, in Indonesia. We work with human rights lawyers, with journalists, and different legal actors in Indonesia that document cases. So what I'm trying to give you is an overview of the types of cases that we receive. We do not only receive cases from West Papua, also from other parts of Indonesia, but the majority of them is from West Papua for statistical reasons. Extrajudicial killings are a main, I would say, the #1 key issue. We have, since the beginning of this year, documented 13 cases of such killings. In this year, they are often conducted as part of military operations. These military operations typically take place in the highlands. The districts of Nduga and Yahukimo are the main hotspots. Sometimes this is a result of an armed interaction between armed separatist groups like the West Papua National Liberation Army, TPNPB, and security forces. Sometimes this is an issue of some military groups from the state, from the Indonesian military, conducting operations in villages in retaliation or in pursuit of finding members of armed groups. And more than seldom are civilians caught in the crossfire of these retaliatory measures. Sometimes civilians are also deliberately targeted when they are perceived as sympathizers of the independence movement or other opposition groups. Investigations and accountability for these cases are rare. Torture and ill treatment is another big subject. During arrest, detention, and interrogation, often people who are suspected as members of the TPNPB or other armed groups are facing this kind of treatment. During demonstrations, there's an excessive use of force that is applied to then dozens or hundreds of protesters. Practically 99% of the victims of these violations are male, young, indigenous Papuans. And to give you an overview, in West Papua, I mean Western New Guinea, composed of 6 Indonesian provinces as of now, there are about 5.6 million people. According to a government census from 2 years ago, we estimate that about 30% of them, let's say 1.5 to 2 million, are indigenous Papuans. There's an ongoing transmigration taking place, so the share of the population that is indigenous in West Papua is reduced. So you have protests against these developments. Police is then cracking these protests down. Members of the political movement West Papua National Committee, KNPB, are often subjected to arrest, torture, and degrading treatment. We have more than 100 cases of such arrests during the year. Especially in the last quarter, since July, we have had some more than 220 victims of arbitrary arrest documented. The real number is obviously higher than that. These arrests take place when Papuans are trying to raise their flag of identity, the Morning Star flag, or conduct political protests. They are then often charged with incitement, with treason or violence or other charges. And the trials that they then face are typically marked by legal irregularities, to say the least, denial of fair trial and appropriate legal representation. So this results in a then again in a violation of freedom of expression for many Papuans and freedom of assembly, especially in politically important events to Papuans, such as the 1st of December every year. We have hundreds of such arrests, and as a result of that, also a censorship of media, of journalists. We see media restrictions. We get reports of journalists being intimidated and threatened to not report about such protests. There are some efforts by the Indonesian authorities to hold trials against these perpetrators, but by and large, the sentences are very light. The suspects are among the police are mostly acquitted, and many of the cases are not even brought to a independent trial. In the third quarter of this year, we also saw many cases of land grabbing, where the principle of free, prior, and informed consent was bypassed, and new mining sites in the highlands, often in cooperation with military, and also in the coastal areas, were starting. The armed clashes that I talked about in the beginning have been occurring, especially over the last 5 to 10 years, and they are increasing, and they result in a lot of displacement. By now we estimate, and by now I mean in this month, we estimate that we have up to 80,000 internally displaced persons in Papua, all of which are 99% of them which are indigenous Papuans, women and children. So entire villages leave to avoid a military, being part of a military confrontation between the Indonesian army just against the villagers, or against young men in the village, or as part of just clashes between the armed groups, TP and PB, and the military. Also there we have displacement as an outcome. Until today, neither the Indonesian government, nor the provincial administration, nor the regency administrations have declared a state of emergency that would have allowed national and international humanitarian access to enter these regions. Instead, there are still ongoing military operations which prevent any such humanitarian aid to be provided. Issues of health and sanitation. We have higher mortality rates in these IDP camps. We have some 5 to 10 different regencies in which these IDPs are located. In overcrowded shelters, schooling takes place in tents or half-open tents. It's somewhat similar to, thank you. It's somewhat similar to the pictures you may see from the situation in Gaza. But we don't see these pictures from West Papua because media cannot access it to that extent. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Norman. Once again, please do avail yourselves of the materials that Human Rights Monitor regularly produces that document and provide more detail about the situations that he has described. We now move to our next speaker, who, technology permitting, will join us online. Savitri Nurina is the Campaign and Advocacy Manager at Amnesty International Indonesia, in which context human rights violations in West Papua is a major focus. For the past 6 years, the global movement has released 2 reports regarding the situation of human rights in the region, namely, Don't Bother, Just Let Him Die, Killing with Impunity in Papua, a report issued in 2018, and Gold Rush, Indonesia's mining plans risk fueling abuses in Papua, a report issued in 2022. So hopefully Savitri is online and we can hear from her now.
Thank you, Peter. Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants. We'd like to bring your attention to our concerns regarding human rights situations in West Papua. Amnesty International acknowledges the multiple human rights violations that have persisted for decades in the region. For this forum, however, we would like to highlight 3 issues concerning the rights to life and to be free from torture or cruel, degrading, or inhuman treatment or punishment. Second, the issues concerning rights to freedom of expression. Third one, the issue concerning indigenous people's rights. For at least the past decade, Amnesty International has recorded several incidents regarding the rights to life. One of them is unlawful killings. As you see on the screen, between January 2018 to August 2024, we noted at least 82 suspected incidents of unlawful killings by members of the Indonesian security forces involving 134 victims. And it occurred in 24 regencies in West Papua region. Now, if you compare to the data that we had previously in our report from 2010 to 2018, we recorded at least 69 suspected incidents with 95 victims. As for now, you would see that the number is strikingly increasing. And now I'd like to bring your attention to the recent incidents of unlawful killing. At least we noted 3 incidents. On July 2024, this year, 3 people in Mulia district allegedly shot by military personnel. And then the following month, on 20 August, 2 Yahokimo locals were allegedly shot by the police. One of them lost his life. And of course, I believe that all of you in the room have been aware as well. On the 5th of August, the New Zealand pilot for Intan Angkasa Air Service was killed by an armed group. And I also give note that this incident perpetrated by the pro-independence movement. Next, for the issue of right to be free from torture or cruel, degrading, or inhuman treatment or punishment, we also like to share with you the recent incidents of torture and other ill treatments. On March 2024, for example, we received reports that contains a viral video showed acts of torture against indigenous Papuans in Puncak Regency. It was alleged that members of military involved in the incidents. And then just this month, but last year, the police held a midnight raid into an office of Kingmi Church in Duga. And during the process, unfortunately, several forms of violence were done toward the church people, including the church official. And this is our second key issue, which is the rights to freedom of expression. We found suppression of peaceful political expression, which is not surprising because the incidents have happened for the past decade. But our data shows between January 2019 to June 24, we at least noted 127 Papuans were arrested and detained solely for exercising their right to freedom of expression and peaceful assembly. Also, we found physical violence and racial abuse of West Papuan protesters. We take you back to the day when the Papua Special Autonomy happened in the region and how deforestation there striking surprisingly. And we noted that the rate between 2002 to 2021 stood around 60.300 hectares per year. And on the screen, and you can find the document later, we noted several incidents of this physical violence and racial abuse of the protesters. And now coming to the last issue from us, that is indigenous people's rights. We know that the right to free, prior, and informed consent prior to development projects and or business operations has been violated. In many instances, the Indonesian authorities has failed to ensure effective human rights due diligence, including ensuring the indigenous people's right to free, prior, and informed consent, or FPIC. In our case, in our previous report, we detailed that in our Wabu blog report that Peter previously mentioned. And we also note no presence of indigenous peoples allowed. As per today, Indonesia has not passed the Indigenous Peoples Bill, which stipulates the recognition of indigenous peoples and the protections of their rights. The deliberation of the bill has stalled in the parliament for over a decade, despite being 3 times included in the national legislative program priority. So now, we come to the challenges ahead that will be faced in the region. So we found that there will be racial profiling by security forces targeting and/or discriminating West Papuans in protests and other activities. Those linked to blanket assumption of those protesting and also linked to the pro-independence movement. Second, there's still impunity for gross human rights violations, and it will pose severe questions on the accountability of human rights violations perpetrators, that is the security force. The third one, we acknowledge that the adoption of the new penal code will potentially limit the freedom of expression, especially in the region. And number 4, we found one of the challenges is the proposed military and police bills that will give more expansive authority to the force despite an accountability. Number 5, we found that access for foreign journalists remains challenging, if not none. And last, Indonesia has not issued a standing invitation to the UN special procedures, and it currently has 15 visits requests pending. And this is our recommendation. Number 1 is ensure that all unlawful killings alleged to have been committed by Indonesian security forces are investigated promptly, independently, impartially, and effectively. Number 2, we encourage the Indonesian authorities to take effective measures to ensure that threats, attacks, intimidation, and harassment against individuals expressing peaceful opinions, including human rights defenders and journalists, are promptly, thoroughly, impartially, independently, transparently, and effectively investigated, and those suspected being responsible are tried in line with international standards of fairness. Number 3, meaningfully consult with affected indigenous people and civil society in general on the proposed Indigenous Peoples Bill and other bills that affect the civic space. Number 4, we encourage the Indonesian authorities to promptly implement the recommendations made by the Human Rights Committee regarding impunity and accountability for past human rights violations, persons deprived of their liberty and conditions of detention and freedom of expressions. We also encourage the Indonesian government to promptly implement the recommendations made by the Committee on ESCR regarding business and human rights and rights of indigenous peoples. We encourage the Indonesian government to respond favorably with no further delay to visit requests by, among others, the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Peaceful Assembly and Association, the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression, and the Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous People, and ensure full and unfettered access, including to West Papua. Last but not least, we would like to encourage the Indonesian government to facilitate a visit by the High Commissioner for Human Rights at the earliest. Thank you, and back to you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Narina. I'm very glad to have you online with us, where we just miss you here in person, but thank you for joining us online. And then we move to the last speaker in our panel, who is Simonetta Fraudatario, who is coordinator of the Permanent People's Tribunal and a researcher at the Lelio Basso Foundation. Of the Permanent People's Tribunal's numerous works, she has in particular coordinated sessions in Latin America and in recent years in some Asian countries. And as I mentioned earlier, in July this year, the Permanent People's Tribunal held public hearings at the Centre for Climate Crime and Climate Justice at Queen Mary University in London in the UK, examining a body of evidence on the environmental impacts of development projects in West Papua and the human rights violations linked to those practices. And I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge the presence also of representatives of Queen Mary University and to thank them for their support for this process. Thank you. Over to you, Simonetta.
Thank you very much, Peter. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you very much. It's an honor to present for the very first time a synthesis of the judgment of the Permanent People's Tribunal on state and environmental violence in West Papua. As Peter already underlined, the request for this session on West Papua and the indictment submitted to this tribunal was promoted by the Center for Climate Crime and Climate Justice and a network of international and Indonesian human and environmental rights organizations and associations. The task assumed by this tribunal was to establish the truth about the criminal events in West Papua and the repression taking place there, but also to clarify and to reaffirm their rights regarding land and environment. The huge documentation submitted to this tribunal, and most especially the testimony heard in the public hearings, paint a picture of devastating attack on West Papua lives and livelihoods. West Papua represents an exemplary case of contemporary denial of self-determination, of the right of self-determination, principle that was recognized in the Universal Declaration of Rights of People, which gave birth to this tribunal in 1979. The tribunal was asked to deliberate on 4 charges levied against the Indonesian government as well as foreign actors. For reason of times, only in certain parts of the judgment, which consists in 8 sections, will be read out today. I will focus on a brief summary of the response of the 4 charges and the essential part of the deliberation and recommendations. In response to the evidence heard on land grabbing, violent repression, human rights violation, environmental degradation, and collusion between the Indonesian state and national and foreign companies, the tribunal has considered that, number 1, the indigenous communities have suffered painful dispossession and have been deprived of elementary freedoms such as of that of movement and deprived as well of economic rights. Number 2, the system of prior consultation is, since the controversial annexation referendum in 1969, manipulated by the state of Indonesia to achieve its own purpose and fails to guarantee any respect for the special relationship, economic but also spiritual, between West Papuan population and their environments. Number 3, very serious case and concrete data of human rights abuses were presented to the tribunal. The indigenous communities of West Papua live, according to one witness, in the shadow of fear. This condition has been constructed over the time via state crimes, as well as grants of impunity for the perpetrators of those crimes. Number 4, the effects on land, water, and forest has been severe as a result of the mining and agricultural activities, of the extraction and liquidification of natural gas, of deliberate deforestation for palm oil plantation, and of recent food estate projects. Number 5, the tribunal considers that the ecological degradation can't be disaggregated from state and corporate projects, which are tending toward the obliteration of a people, or what was called by more than one witness a slow genocide. Number 6, the tribunal heard the implication of the business-state military nexus that characterizes the industrial activity in the region. It consists in a regime of terror, militarization, legal impunity, irregularities, and restriction of the conduct of human and livelihoods, as well as on exchanges of thought and information. Number 7, in particular, the Indonesian National Army has become instrumental in the protection of state and corporate interests in a way that involved repression against those who oppose or denounce the widely documented abuses. According to another witness, they couldn't take the land, so they needed to create a conflict. Number 8, The corporation considered in the indictment, including, among others, Freeport-McMoran, BP and its partners, and 11 Palm Oil Corporation, are directly implicated in the violence perpetrated against the indigenous communities. This tribunal also learned that the Western states are implicated in the training Indonesian security forces responsible of human rights abuses. I'm now reading the deliberation. Based on the evidence examined, the state of Indonesia is convicted of all the charges in the indictment, namely, of taking by various means the ancestral land of indigenous Papuan people against their will, employing racial discrimination which leads to the loss of culture, tradition, and indigenous knowledge, erases their history, and subsumes them into the Indonesian national narratives. Of violent repression, including unlawful detention, extrajudicial killing, and population displacement in West Papua as means of furthering industrial development. Of organized environmental degradation, including the destruction of ecosystems, contamination of land, the poison of rivers, and of providing the permits, concessions, and legal structure of non-compliance for national and foreign companies to invest in West Papua in a way that encourages environmental degradation. Of colluding with national and foreign companies to cause environmental degradation, population displacement, and sustain violent repression in West Papua. I will only read, for time constraints, some of the extensive recommendations made by our judges, which are addressed to the government of Indonesia regarding ancestral land, environmental and indigenous Papuan, internally displaced people, justice and rule of law and access to UN and humanitarian assistance, and other groups of recommendation regards private sectors, countries of the region, international community and private actors, and national and international civil society. I will focus, for reasons of time, just on some recommendation addressed to the government of Indonesia for their importance. The government of Indonesia should honor its obligation as UN member state and ensure a valid act to freely exercise the right of self-determination in accordance with the 1960 Declaration on the granting of independence to colonial countries and people. The government of Indonesia should ensure that any framework of development in indigenous land must properly introduce real self-determination for Papuans to ensure they have autonomy and meaningful collective bargaining. The government of Indonesia must recognize rights over traditional territories, indigenous land tenure system, and traditional occupation to guarantee their respect and protection and ensure that they are not supplanted by simplified and private ownership. The government of Indonesia and the private sectors must properly secure the free, prior, and informed consent of Papuans for all matters affecting them in order to achieve social peace and protect indigenous and ecological system in West Papua. The government of Indonesia have to enhance their efforts in reversing deforestation by 2030 to limit global warming. The government of Indonesia must grant access to the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, UN Special Rapporteur, and other UN human rights body to visit West Papua for the purpose of fully investigating human rights violation and promoting and protecting such rights. This demand is now supported by over 100 UN member states. The judges and the PPT Secretariat are immensely thankful for the trust placed in the tribunal. The United Nations in particular has been involved in the fate of West Papuans from the beginning. This tribunal considers it imperative that a sizable UN investigation with a broader mandate is carried out as soon as possible and that UN Human Rights Council discusses past and current violation committed against West Papua indigenous communities, as well as possible form of accountability and reparation. On behalf of the judges of the PPT, Teresa Almeida Cravo, Donna Andrews, Daniel Firestein, Marina Forti, Larry Lohman, Nello Rossi, Solomon Io, thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you very much, Simonetta, for this presentation of this important body of work undertaken by the Permanent People's Tribunal. I also want to add just a word of my own on behalf of the World Council of Churches, that we have been monitoring and advocating with regard to the situation in West Papua for decades. And over that long period of time, we have observed and continue to observe persistently high levels of serious human rights violations, and in many respects, increasing or a deteriorating situation from both a human rights and a humanitarian perspective, especially in recent years, with a much greater incidence of internal displacement due to the conflict, and especially due to the actions of Indonesian military and security personnel. And in this regard, I think I would like to take this opportunity to appeal to the government of Indonesia to reverse the policy that currently prevents international humanitarian access to the region in order to respond to the humanitarian crisis there. And to start by re-establishing the ICRC subdelegation in Jayapura that was closed by the government in 2009. We are gravely concerned about the future prospects in the region, given that it is already a hyper-militarized context in West Papua. And now we are aware of the new proposals to only increase the powers and the authority of military and security personnel in the region without any adequate checks and balances for their accountability. So now the floor is open for any comments and questions to what you've heard from the panel. And I will ask any interveners to be as brief as possible to allow for as many comments as possible. Please, Indonesia.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Thank you for providing us with the opportunity. Our engagement today aims to be constructive, adding balance to how situation has been portrayed. At the outset, let me reiterate the Indonesian government commitment to the welfare and security of our citizens in Papua. We believe the challenges and achievements in implementing these policies should be presented equally. On this note, allow me to share 3 key points. First, on development. Without adequate and equitable development across Papua's 6 provinces, access to healthcare, education, and employment will remain limited. Since 2010, progress has been made, with decreased poverty rates and improvement in the Human Development Index and life expectancy. The Special Autonomy Law 2021 allocates 2.25% of the national budget to accelerate development in Papua, focusing on education, healthcare, infrastructure, and economic empowerment. The Special Autonomy Budget Plan for the Papua provinces allocated for 2025 is approximately 5 trillion rupiahs. This amount is nearly 5 times bigger than the 1.2 trillion rupiah allocated for the special region of Yogyakarta, and even bigger than the combined budget allocation for the Special Autonomous Province of Aceh and Yogyakarta. Over nearly a decade, we have built over 3,000 kilometers of highways, bridges, airports, and 6 power plants to support the region's development. We continue implementing affirmative policies to increase access to education and employment for Papuan youth. These development policies reflect the government's commitment to protecting all citizens without discrimination, regardless of ethnicity and geography. Unfortunately, despite ongoing efforts, significant security challenges persist. This brings me to my second point, the ongoing threat to stability and development in Papua's provinces. A prosperous future where children are healthy, educated, and free from terror cannot be built while armed groups continue to terrorize communities. Violence by this group has escalated with a troubling rise in victims, including security personnel and civilians. In 2019, there were 336 violent incidents, and by 2023, this surged to 139. Healthcare facilities, airports, homes, government buildings, and even workers like healthcare staff, teachers, and pilots have been targeted by this group. I wish to reiterate that it is the state's primary duty to ensure the security of its citizens. Law enforcement operations are conducted in accordance with national and international legal frameworks. Alleged violations during this operation are thoroughly investigated to ensure accountability and uphold the rule of law. My third and final point is on the issue of internally displaced persons. The government of Indonesia is fully committed to addressing the situation of IDPs in Papua. We need to avoid equalizing the challenges faced by the citizens in Papua to what the people under occupation in Gaza are experiencing. It is important to note that the displacement of individuals is not solely caused by the conflict between security forces and armed groups. Natural disasters and intergroup conflicts within local population also play a significant role in displacement. The government has not been absent in this effort to support the IDPs. We continue providing social assistance in collaborating with church and civil society organizations to address the challenges of displaced communities. Despite the security and geographical difficulties, we are making progress. Last year, we successfully repatriated around 6,000 IDPs to district in Maibrat regencies, where we restored home and infrastructure. Mr. Moderator and panelists, in conclusion, while some areas in Papua do need enhanced security, most of its 42 regencies and cities remain safe and are steadily growing. The Indonesian government is working tirelessly to improve security and welfare with continued collaboration from non-state actors. And let me also reiterate that the government of Indonesia, as a sovereign nation, doesn't recognize the competence of a foreign tribunal, such as the People's Tribunal, and thus any discussion or decision issued by this body holds no binding authority or enforcement mechanism over Indonesia. We remain open to constructive suggestions for further improving human rights in Papua. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you very much, Indonesia. I would like to acknowledge and express appreciation on behalf of the civil society community, the NGOs represented in Geneva, for the practice by the Indonesian Permanent Mission to periodically convene discussions with NGO civil society representatives on this and other issues pertaining to Indonesia in general and the wider agenda of the Human Rights Council. We do appreciate that opportunity, and we look forward to continuing that sort of interaction, that sort of open dialogue. And we would very much appreciate a specific conversation round with your ambassador regarding the situation in West Papua specifically. So we look forward to that opportunity. Thank you very much. Other speakers, other comments? Please.
The opportunity. I'm the Secretary General of the Permanent People's Tribunal. I would like to refer directly to the intervention. I think that first of all, we have approached directly the government of Indonesia to the embassies in order to ask them to be present to the tribunal or to present material for the defense, which is recognized by the statute of the tribunal as a normal rights of the accused parties. We didn't receive any answer. We do not have, obviously, any representation of the government. We are an expression of the civil society, and we have received full documentation which is easily available to the government of Indonesia to document whether the statements which have been proposed and which are corresponding to a documentation which is collected against or outside any international control. So that's one other proof of the policy of misinformation and the denial of the freedom of expression of the peoples of Indonesia, which are still now, and that is recognized also from the statement which have been made, in a colonial status, which is clearly against the basic principle of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Indonesia, as has been documented in the tribunal and by various other documentation, which has produced disinformed consensus to a referendum, and is still now denying a free access and promotion of what has been requested also from United Nations to exerce their duty to make respected the declaration, the Universal Declaration. On the other side, all the data which are available cannot be presented as data which represent the Indonesian country as a unique situation, while there is a situation of conflicts which is producing obviously also victims of the civilian society. But I think a free and internationally controlled evaluation of the existing data must be absolutely obtained under the control of United Nations. Till now, we didn't have from the experts and the existing documentation any proof that the goodwill of the Indonesian government is translated into factual decision and initiatives which could allow a free confrontation of the parties. One of the parties, the peoples of West Papua, are in fact excluded formally from their right to be representative of their population.
Thank you, sir. I recognize Vanuatu has requested the floor.
Church, World Council of Churches to organize this very important site event. Vanuatu remains steadfast on its call to Indonesia on these issues and continue to seek for their positive cooperation. We cannot condone the continuous human rights violations on the indigenous people of West Papua and the impunity on human rights violations. Therefore, we support and call the international community and organizations such as this to continue to provide a platform to speak out and advocate. We believe that our collective voices and efforts can lead to accountability, positive and constructive dialogues, and find solutions that can put an end to these human rights infringements and, above all, relieve the people of West Papua, who deserve so much more in life than these ongoing challenges to their lives, land, and environment. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Vanuatu. Other comments, questions, observations? Please, sir.
Tabaya Mulana Kura Maina. My name is Ghazali Orella. I represent the International Indian Treaty Council. I just want to appreciate the panel for organizing this side event, as it's very important that the Human Rights Council hears directly from indigenous peoples during its sessions, not just in September, but also in June and also in March. So I'm very appreciative of the panel for organizing this event on the aspirations and the human rights violations that are occurring against indigenous peoples. The International Treaty Council has affiliate members from West Papua and continues to support indigenous peoples in West Papua in all their aspirations and all their work. That's the first point that I would like to make, and the second one is that this is from neighbor to neighbor. I am from Maluku, and which is next to West Papua. And in that sense, I would like to also convey as a representative of Maluku to our support for the aspirations of the indigenous peoples in West Papua. Thank you.
I'm David White, Professor David White from Queen Mary University of London. We initiated the the Permanent People's Tribunal because of some of the issues we've heard today, and I just want to reiterate why what we're looking at is not only a crisis for the region, a crisis for the plight of indigenous people around the world, it's also a crisis for the planet. And I do want to underline some of the points that Leo made as the first speaker, which is that one of the reasons, as a Centre for Climate Crime and Climate Justice, we initiated this is because we realised that we need to protect the third most important area of rainforest in the world. It's biodiversity, which is unrivaled anywhere else in the world. And in order to do that, we must defend the rights of the people of West Papua to manage the land in a sustainable way, to manage any industrial development in a sustainable way, and that clearly is not the case. We've heard in a range of different ways from the speakers that there's an intimate relationship between human rights violations, the humanitarian crisis, and the lack of any sustainable development, the lack of any prospects of ensuring that the forest is protected for all of us. And this means that we need a different system, a system which is not based upon the rabid exploitation or the mode of extortion and expropriation that we see right now in Indonesia, and we're committed to continuing that discussion on that basis.
Very good. Thank you very much. Well, then, in closing, I would simply like to express appreciation for all the speakers who have shared their experiences and their insights and their analyses for the purpose of widening the circle of awareness and engagement on this issue. And I want to thank all of you for your participation and your evident commitment to addressing the issue, and especially the good representation of permanent missions here, starting with that of Indonesia. Very much appreciate your presence here for this, this exchange, and we look forward to further follow-up and further conversation. So thank you, everybody, and I wish you a good remainder of the day.